Okay, so like Jen said, while I was at Graceland, a lot of the research that I did was focused around food and food systems and how we can address issues of food security with regard for the environmental pressures created by the food industry. And today the solution I'm proposing is, is insects. Holy cow. How do I start over? Sorry. I might just use the computer. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so accepting insects as a valuable food source can address the increasingly relevant issues of both food security and the environmental pressures created by the food industry. How many of you have eaten an insect on purpose? Okay, that's pretty good. So in order to understand their enormous potential, I want to first take a look at where the future of food is heading. By the year 2050, the population will have increased by more than 1/3, from 7 billion to 9 billion. And in order to feed that population, crop production will need to double. This is because as the population grows, so does affluence. According to the United Nations, in the developed world, meat consumption is an average of 80 kilograms per person per year. In the United States, it's as much as 120 kilograms per person per year, compared to the developing world, which consumes 25 kilograms per person per year. And as the developing world becomes more developed, their meat consumption will rise too. The problem with this is that there is very little room to expand the livestock industry without doing so, without incurring serious environmental costs. So somehow we have to figure out how to increase the yield of already existing agricultural land. Time magazine writes, there may be no other single human activity that has a bigger impact on the planet than the raising of livestock. So we already use a substantial portion of the Earth's land surface for growing crops. Approximately 40% is devoted to agriculture. And of that 40%, 3/4 goes not directly to feeding humans, but to producing the crops that are fed to chickens, pigs, and cattle. So livestock production uses an enormous amount of land, and this also means that it requires an enormous amount of water. In the West, and I should specify the West meaning North America and Europe, 80% of our water goes to livestock production, and of that 80%, half goes directly to growing that feed for livestock. This is the biggest single chunk of our water resources, and it also contributes to water pollution more than any other sector in terms of the fertilizers and pesticides used for growing feed crops, waste from livestock, and then eroded sediment from pasture land. Livestock production also emits an enormous amount of greenhouse gases, 18%, which is more than the greenhouse gas emissions from transport. And so this makes livestock production a large contributing factor to the problem of global warming and climate change. And something else I would like to mention about livestock here that's not directly related to these environmental issues is the potential threat it can pose to human well-being. Livestock like cows, pigs, and chickens are biologically similar enough to humans that they can spread diseases, and we've seen this in the instances of mad cow disease, swine flu, avian flu, etc., where some of the genes from the animal virus DNA recombine with the genes from the human virus DNA to create a new highly pathogenic virus. So, as you can see, livestock production uses an enormous amount of resources, and it generates a lot of waste in the process. There's a relatively recent report from the Food and Agriculture Organization which states that livestock production is one of the major causes of the world's most pressing environmental problems, including climate change, land degradation, air and water pollution, and loss of biodiversity. So the big question becomes, how can we address the issue of food security with concern for these environmental pressures created by the food industry? And my response is insects. Insects are an alternative animal protein source that is tasty, is nutritionally comparable to beef, pork, and chicken, uses far less resources, produces less greenhouse gases and less waste, can even be used to recycle waste, and poses almost no risk of transmitting diseases to humans. Now, before you say yuck and write me off, hear me out. I'm going to show you that despite our cultural taboo against insects, they can be a truly good and realistic alternative to our meat consumption. They can be not only just about the most environmentally friendly thing you can eat, but also some of the tastiest and the healthiest. But first, I will appeal to the environmentalist in you and make a few comparisons between what it takes to raise insects versus livestock. So first, we're going to look at something called the feed-to-meat conversion rate, which is how much feed is needed to produce a 1 pound increase in weight. So if you have a cow, in order to increase the weight of that cow by 1 pound, it's going to require 10 pounds of feed. Pigs require 5 for that 1 pound increase, chickens 2.5, and crickets 1.7. So comparing input to output, the cricket comes out on top, the chicken's not that much further behind. But of that 1 pound, how much is actually edible? For cows, it's only 40%. For pigs and chickens, it's about 55%. And crickets, you can eat 80% of that animal. And for some insects, it is even 100%. So this means that crickets are twice as efficient in converting feed to meat as chicken, at least 4 times more efficient than pigs, and 12 times more efficient than cattle. Insects have a high feed to meat conversion efficiency because they are cold-blooded, and cold-blooded animals who are not constantly spending their energy trying to maintain a constant body temperature do not have to eat as often or as much. And as for what accounts for the high percentage of the animal that is actually edible, well, you can eat the entire insect in most cases. There's no deboning, defeathering, degutting, deskinning, etc. That needs to be done. So now we're going to take a look at the resource use of these 4 different livestock. Okay, so for that 1 pound increase in weight in a cow, it requires 10 pounds of feed. Pigs require 5 pounds of feed, and chickens 2.5 pounds of feed. So you can see the amount of land and water that amount of feed requires is pretty substantial. Insects require 2 cubic feet of land space and 1 gallon of water for that 1 pound increase in weight. Okay. Now let's look at some of the waste byproducts that producing this 1 pound generates. So in the instance of the cow, if you're only getting 1 pound of output out of every 10 pounds of input, where do you think all of that other 9 pounds is going? Waste management is actually a serious environmental problem. It's not uncommon for large amounts of manure to just be stockpiled in open air lots, swarming with flies. Insects, on the other hand, generate far less waste and emit far fewer greenhouse gases, and can even be used to recycle waste. So the waste stream in the United States is pretty enormous, and organic materials account for 2/3 of it. And this is an issue that needs to be addressed by producers and consumers alike, but the fact of the matter is we're never going to be able to totally eliminate all waste. So the ability of insects to divert a portion of that waste back into the food system makes them an even more economical and environmentally conscious option. So organic matter, including manure, can be recycled as feed for raising insects. And being able to substitute a traditional food source like grain with organic waste would make insect farming more profitable as well. So think about being to take all of your food scraps and other organic wastes and use those as feed, turning them into a source of protein. And as those insects are breaking down those wastes, they are also creating nutrient-rich soil that can then be used as fertilizer. So out of trash, you're ending up with 2 extremely valuable products. And going back to the topic of manure waste, I wanted to look at a particular species called the black soldier fly, the larva which is particularly efficient at bioconverting organic waste. In a trial where they were used to break down pig manure, they were found to reduce the nutrient concentration and bulk of the manure residue. They're able to reduce the pollution potential of that manure by 50 to 60%. They naturally aerate and dry the manure, which reduces or even eliminates any foul smells. And they keep out the bugs that we don't want, like the common housefly. And I should specify, the common housefly is different than these bugs because they only feed in the larval stage, whereas the housefly feeds in the adult stage. So that's why you see them swarming around manure. They were also found to alter the microflora and fauna found in the manure, potentially reducing harmful bacteria. So this is one instance where insects have been used in waste management. Insects also have the potential to be raised as mini livestock. Cows need space to roam, pigs and chicken to forage, but the fact of the matter is it is not very efficient to grant them that when we're raising them on an industrial scale. We've all seen pictures of horrible, dark, dirty, crowded factory farms, but insects get the win here once again because they actually like those kind of conditions. So this gives them the potential to be raised in cities and other areas with very small amounts of land. And there's a handful of companies coming up with some pretty innovative designs for mini livestock farms that the average person could use to raise insects at home. A lot of insects are seasonal, so finding ways that they could be raised year-round, both on a small scale like this as well as on a mass scale, is important in making them a reliable source of nutrition and income. Insects are becoming an increasingly attractive option not only for human consumption, but also as feed for raising livestock like fish, pigs, and chickens. So currently, ingredients for both animal and fish feed include soybeans, several other types of grains, sometimes whey or powdered milk, and in the case of fish, fish meal and fish oil. And as we've seen, producing these crops that are needed to feed livestock, as well as obtaining the fish needed for fish meal and fish oil, is very taxing on the environment. But insects are already a natural food source for fish and poultry, and can be raised using far fewer resources, and like we've seen, even on those organic wastes. As a natural food source, insects are easily digestible and incredibly nutritious, and perhaps even mean reduced use of antibiotics. I think this is an especially attractive option for aquaculture, which is the largest, it's like the fastest growing animal food producing sector. And obtaining the fish meal consists of gathering smaller fish that are less popular with human consumers. But since it's so popular, these populations are very quickly being depleted, and insects can provide a really excellent alternative for replacing that. Okay, so environmentally and economically, it makes sense. So why are we not doing it? Well, eating insects is not a new or radical idea. People have been eating insects for all of human history. In fact, without insects, there might not even be humans. Let's go way back. These two chimps are extracting termites from a mound using sticks, and these guys are not acting that much differently than our ancestors were 200,000 years ago. In fact, some of the earliest bone tools found by archaeologists are thought to have been used specifically for gathering insects. But we had to branch out. Insects were not always available in large enough quantities to fulfill our daily nutrition requirement, and humans developed the tools and intelligence to hunt larger animals. But insects always remained an important part of the human diet. And this makes sense because particularly during the right seasons, insects were a big caloric payoff at very little energetic expense. There's no chasing things around, throwing spears, there's very little risk involved. So gathering and foraging, including insects, was what kept tribes going between big kills. They were essential to fulfilling the nutrient requirements of our ancestors. Even populations that appeared to have subsisted off only plant matter were actually supplementing their diet with insects. And today, all of our primate relatives still chow down on insects. Why is this though? What's in insects that makes them so nutritionally valuable and desirable? Well, these little guys are chock full of protein, iron, calcium, zinc, and healthy fat in the form of essential fatty acids. And essential fatty acids are especially important. The human brain is disproportionately large in relation to our body mass. It uses 20 to 25% of the energy that we eat, and it needs long-chain essential fatty acids, or omegas 3, 6, 9, for a variety of functions. And humans, as well as most mammals and fish, cannot synthesize these. We must obtain them from our diet. Termites are particularly high in essential fatty acids, and they may have even been the steady source that helped us build brain tissue and grow such big brains in the first place. Now let's look at some of the other nutritional components that insects have to offer. So like I said, they're full of healthy fat, but they are also high in protein, iron, calcium, zinc, and some other micronutrients. but how do they really compare? So here on the end is the cricket, and we've got chicken, beef, and pork. Beef comes out on top, chicken comes out on top in terms of protein, with beef not far behind. As you can see, the cricket is extremely high in calcium, and this is due to the chitinous exoskeleton. Here's a chart that shows some other insects as well: crickets, mealworms, that soldier fly larva, and then at the bottom you have fish, beef, and chicken. Since there's such an enormous variety of insects, there's also going to be an enormous variety as far as the nutritional components go. But even though there is significant variation, most edible insects provide sufficient amounts of energy. They meet amino acid requirements for humans. They're high in fatty acids, and they're rich in micronutrients. A lot of those micronutrients come from being able to eat the entire insect and all of its organs, which most of us typically don't do with other livestock any longer. And there certainly is need for continued research in the area of insect nutrition. Okay, so I've shown you the insects are healthy for the environment, they are healthy for us, but is that enough to have convinced you? What is stopping us from eating them? Well, to figure out where this prejudice developed, we have to go back in history again. As the first humans began to move away from the equator towards Europe, they were leaving the consistently warm climate of the tropics that allowed insects to be available year-round. And if we look at the places where insects are still eaten today, they are generally located around the equator, where this warm tropical environment allows insects to grow particularly large and to be available year-round. Here, bugs are big enough and plentiful enough to easily make a meal out of, so the custom of eating insects has persisted. Another reason that we stopped eating bugs was because of agriculture, or the domestication of plants and animals. And what did we domesticate? Animals that could provide a huge quantity of meat in addition to other products such as milk, fur, leather, wool, transportation, and labor, like pulling plows. It is thought that it was because of the utility of these animals that the use of insects failed to gain much traction in the West. They simply could not offer the same benefits. As modern agriculture spread and civilization grew, the only time that people were encountering insects was when they were invading human space, eating their crops, the food in their pantries, crawling across the wall in their home. Insects became a pest and a nuisance because they were competing for our food. There are a good number of foods that we eat and enjoy today that evoked a pretty similar type of reaction in the past. When the Spanish first encountered potatoes in Peru and brought them to Europe, they were not seen as fit for human consumption. They were fed only to animals, prisoners, and the poor. However, someone eventually realized, or more likely was forced to realize, that they are pretty good stuff, and today they are a staple food. When sushi was first introduced in the United States, people were not very keen on eating raw fish, but now it's a very popular thing to eat, and it's oftentimes served as a delicacy. Crab, lobster, and shrimp are also considered delicacies today, but at one time they were considered dirty scavengers and food for the poor. It's especially interesting to look at the similarities between insects and crustaceans because they are related. They have hard exoskeletons, they have segmented bodies, and oftentimes they're served as the whole animal, which is different from the way a lot of other meat is served. Insects like locusts and cicadas have been called the shrimp of the land. So this all goes to show that what we eat is largely a matter of fashion and culture. And when it comes to insects, the Western world is a minority for not having jumped on this trend. Over 2 billion people around the world enjoy over 2,000 different species of insects. Here is a variety of insects for sale in Bangkok. We've got some chapulines, or grasshoppers, for sale in Oaxaca, Mexico. Scorpions and beetles for sale in China. Caterpillars in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I can keep telling you how environmentally, economically, and nutritionally superior insects are, but that is not enough to counter the disgust factor that has been conditioned into us. So I have to also convince you that they are tasty. So how do we go about this? The key, I think, is in how we prepare them. Think about what you had to do to get a younger kid to eat broccoli, or what your parents had to do to get you to eat vegetables. They have to transform it somehow, put some cheese on it, hide it in a casserole. And I would hope that now most of you are okay with eating a piece of broccoli or a carrot by itself. It may not be something that you would choose to eat, but it's not totally revolting to you like maybe it once was. Let's think about some other healthy foods like maybe spinach or kale. Who here eats spinach? Okay, and how do you eat it? Raw, okay. But do you just stuff plain leaves whole into your mouth? No, you usually add it to a salad, you put some dressing on there, some cranberries or some walnuts, or you add it to your eggs or a soup. And the point is, when I talk about eating insects, this is how we need to approach it. In places where people are used to eating grasshoppers, it probably doesn't gross them out to pop a whole one plain into their mouth. But in this situation, we are the picky, fussy kids, and we're going to turn our nose up at that. So we need to think of ways that we can present insects that are a little more appealing than just, a piece of broccoli by itself, a grasshopper by itself. There are already a number of companies working on this, trying to repackage this old practice in new and exciting ways to change perceptions. So we've got Exo, which Jen was lucky enough to get some samples from. They make a protein bar based out of cricket flour, and they kind of appeal to the same crowd that like Cliff bars and other bars like that are trying to appeal to. We've got a company called Chapool. They make a similar product. It's a gourmet energy bar made from all natural ingredients that also includes cricket flour. Six Foods makes Chirps, cricket chips. I think they also make cricket flour cookies, and I believe that you can also buy just straight cricket flour from them. There's Ytell, which has a plate on the bento box, so they've got these colorful bite-sized cubes, and a product that's fun and colorful, and it's aesthetically appealing as well as ethically appealing. Okay. And we've got, I had a couple months ago an experience of going to a dinner hosted by Rocky Mountain Micro Ranch, which is Colorado's first and only edible insect farm. So they served us 4 courses, and it was hosted at a winery. So we got wine along with each course as well. The first course was toasted waxworms on winter greens with pomegranate seeds, and this was actually my favorite. The waxworms, or I guess I call them mealworms, had a really nutty, they were kind of like sunflower seeds, a nutty flavor and kind of a crunchy texture, and it wasn't at all unappealing. And then we had a pasta with queen weaver ants, and these were good as well. They're really, as far as texture, they were also crunchy, but there was no noticeable or distinct flavor from them. Then we had locust skewers with roasted root vegetables. This was probably my least favorite because they did not take the wings off of the locust, and you couldn't really chew them, and so that was kind of unappealing. But otherwise, the flavor was not, again, it was not anything distinct at all. And then finally, we had cricket powder tarts with caramel ricotta topped with Chinese lemon ants. You never would have known that the tart had cricket flour in it, and those ants were supposed to have kind of a lemony flavor, which I really didn't notice either. But something interesting about insects is that I've read that based on what you feed them, their flavor changes more distinctly than other livestock does, simply because they're so small. So I think you can mess around with what you feed them to create different flavor profiles, which is interesting. So this is Colorado or Rocky Mountain Micro Ranch. They're based in a shipping crate behind a food co-op right now. But I've noticed that they've been hosting a lot of events around Denver, so hopefully they'll continue to expand and grow. The really exciting thing about insects is that there are thousands of varieties available, which means thousands of flavor variations. There are 1 million species of described insects, but many more are thought to exist. They count for more than 70% of all known organisms. And contrary to popular belief, of those 1 million described species, only 5,000 can be considered harmful to crops, livestock, or human beings. For people that live in countries where eating insects is still a common practice, insects are an extremely valuable source of nutrition as well as income. And as the developing world becomes westernized and our attitude towards eating insects remains negative, this practice is beginning to die out. And this would be such an enormous loss for those countries that already eat insects and a missed opportunity for those that currently do not. However, if people see more Westerners eating insects and encouraging this practice, it could result in an even more stable and profitable source of income and nutrition and ensure that nutritional needs continue to be met. Traditionally, insects are foraged from the wild, but if the farming of insects was encouraged, this would provide a more secure livelihood, especially for people who don't have a lot of resources, and it would address any concern of depleting wild populations. The use of pesticides is spreading and increasing too, and even if we don't yet value insects for their potential as a food source, this is something that should really worry us because the fact is we can't live without them. Insects provide countless irreplaceable services. Over 90% of flowering species depend on pollinators, and so do 75% of the 200 major crop species. Out of all the pollinator species, 98% are insects. Insects are also decomposers, breaking down organic matter, which allows nutrients to be returned to the soil and available for plants to take up again. They act as biological control agents and naturally control harmful pest species. The number of beneficial insect species in the average agroecosystem typically far outweighs the number of harmful insect species. And they're also a main food source for many animals like birds and bats, possums, reptiles, amphibians. Most of what we know about eating insects is based off of local traditional knowledge. So there is an increased need for research as far as rearing methods, both on a mass scale and a small local scale, efficient harvesting methods for wild populations, optimizing ecological benefits such as decomposition and pest control, comprehensive nutritional analyses, processing, preparation, and preservation methods, as well as regulatory frameworks that will establish guidelines for producers. There is currently a growing body of research seeking to answer these questions and to address barriers, coming from independent groups, other organizations, universities, perhaps most notably the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So imagine using less resources while reducing and recycling waste, controlling pests, providing livelihood opportunities, protecting biodiversity, all while gaining a nutritious and tasty source of food and animal feed with thousands of available varieties. Insects as a food source is a growing trend that is rapidly gaining popularity, not just in the academic and environmental realm, but is capturing the interest of chefs looking to experiment with something new, of the health conscious, of athletes looking for a new protein source, and foodies looking to hop onto the next trend, and increasingly everyday consumers like you and I. So chances are good that you will find insects on your plate that have been put there on purpose sometime in the future. And I hope that my presentation has helped you see that this is not something that you should be concerned about. In fact, we should even be excited about this. There is so much going for it and almost nothing going against it. So my message to you, eat insects, save the world. And does anyone have any questions? Yes.
My favorite arthropod is lobster, but I restrict myself to eating the muscle, and I don't eat the GI tract. And presumably insects have the same kind of bacteria-aided digestive system that we do. That the only disgusting part of this, aside from the fact that you can clean it off on the surface, is that you're eating this entire GI tract with its full complement of bacteria and partially digested food and so forth. Can you comment on that?
I can. So When I first gave this presentation, I bought some mealworms and some crickets from a reptile feed supplier, and I raised them, and then I prepared them to bring to my presentation so people could sample them. And so I did some research on preparation methods for insects, and one thing that you are supposed to do is to purge them before you prepare them. So you do not feed them. I think it's like a 2-day period or something where you don't give them any food and you let them rid themselves of any undigested food. And then, so essentially you clean them out and then you prepare them.
When I go through a prep for my colonoscopy, I don't reduce the bacteria that much. It's still all there.
Okay, and as far as that goes, that I do not have an answer to. I don't know how much of a problem that can be, since there's not a lot of research as far as insect nutrition goes, and certainly there are places that eat large quantities of insects where you think they would be eating enough that would show some effect, but I don't know if there's very much research. So that is a very good question.
You cook them, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you can eat them raw, but...
Well, I mean, if you have the bacterial problem,
Oh, right.
you got a heat process.
Right.
I mean, bacteria is susceptible to a certain level of heat at a certain amount of time. And it should be, I had the problem with the thing wiggling around on that.
Right.
You know, obviously, you've got a grasshopper there. The legs are very powerful. That's where a lot of the protein is, right, in the muscle in the leg. But jumping around my esophagus is not necessary.
Right, I think cooking is a very important factor here. Would anyone like to try one of these bars generously donated to us by EXO? Sure do.
Thought maybe we could get someone's reaction with eating cricket flour for the first time. I got some brave students in there.
How about you guys should come down here? You think?
Yeah, we're doing it. It is processed, yes. So,
Thank you.
all right, let's get how to make cricket flour.
Yeah, so a lot of times how insects are prepared is they're frozen, like you have them alive, you put them in the freezer so that they're no longer, they go into a hibernative state. And then what I did was just dropped them in boiling water. I can't remember, it was like 5 minutes. And then I took them out of the boiling water, laid them across like a cookie sheet and roasted them. And then ground them in a food processor into a fine flour and then added them to, I made cookies out of them, so I added them to a cookie mix.
All right, so let's get Jerome on camera here trying the cricket flour for the first time. Unless you guys want to all bite into it together.
Yeah.
No? Okay, everyone get a piece of cricket flour, which is in front here.
Yeah, I don't know, it's a little bit of a weird flavor, so you have to let me know how.
Are we ready? You guys want that on 3?
You're making these like so much more tasty. As I said, you're making this so much more tasty.
Yeah, it's really not that big. All right, great.
Congratulations.